Hello students, I am Dinesh Udupi again. We are continuing with our study of ethology part of molecular biology evolution and ethology paper. This is session 44 where we are going to study the learned behavior in animals. What is a learned behavior? In the previous session we concentrated on innate behavior, and in this session we will understand the learned behavior. A long-lasting adaptive change in behavior resulting from past experience. Hence, it is acquired during the lifetime of an individual. So, the behavior pattern which is developed during the lifetime, depending upon the experiences it has faced, depending upon the situations it has encountered. So that acquired pattern of behavior can be considered as the learned behavior. It is acquired during the life of an organism due to constant experience. It is experience dependent and can be modified through experience. The behavior pattern is developed due to the experience. And remember, the learned behavior, the character of learned behavior is the animal can go on changing this learned behavior if it changes experience. With more experience, the behavior also goes on changing. So that is the characteristic feature of learned behavior. Whereas the innate behavior patterns are fixed, so they will never change. But the learned behavior changes from time to time in a lifetime of an organism. Learning is flexible. That is one more character. It is very flexible. It is not fixed. Learning behavior differs from individual to individual. This is the difference between the innate behavior and learned behavior. In case of innate behavior, all the individuals of a particular species show same kind of behavior. But here, the learned behavior of one individual is different from the learned behavior of another individual. You think of humans, right? My behavior is different from another human being's behavior because what is the main reason, right? Why my behavior? Here you can consider behavior like how I talk with others, right? How I respond to some situations, right? Now it is different from individual to individual. Why? Because the individuals are exposed to different types of conditions. The situations or the conditions which I am exposed in my lifetime are different from the situations and the conditions exposed by some other person. So depending upon those conditions which I am exposed, my behavior is decided. My behavior is developed. And depending upon the conditions and situations which are faced by other individual, his behavior pattern is developed. So like this, learned behavior is different from one individual to another individual. Learned behavior is certainly not inherited. Of course, learned behavior is not inherited. For example, hunting behavior of many carnivorous animals is learned behavior, right? And in case of human beings, ability of understanding a language is a learned behavior, right? I know Kannada language, English language, maybe Hindi and some other few languages. So this I have learned. It is not inherited, right? You cannot expect uh, to have the knowledge from your parents. So whatever your father has learned, you think of a doctor, okay, a very famous doctor and very knowledgeable doctor. You cannot expect his son or daughter to be born with all that knowledge. You cannot consider them, you cannot expect them to be a doctor from the birth. They have to learn because whatever the parent has learned during his lifetime, it is going to end with their life only. Because learned behavior have to be acquired by an individual during its lifetime only. So that's how the learned behavior is not inherited, but the ability to learn is inherited. This is what we have to understand, what we have to differentiate. See, I have the ability to learn a new language in my lifetime. Say my father never learned, say, French or German language. He never came across that language. But I have that ability to learn French or German language, even though my father never came across that language. So I have that ability to learn, and that ability is inherited. You cannot expect my dog to learn the German language. This is the difference, right? You cannot expect other animal which cannot speak, which cannot learn language. So there are some limitations of genetic nature, right? You must have proper genes to learn. You can consider them like tools which you can use. If you do not have tools, you cannot do some work. It is something like that. Say for example, I will give another example from the animal kingdom, animal world. Tiger, cheetah, they teach their their young ones how to hunt, right? How to plan the hunting, right? How to attack a deer, how to kill it, etc. The mother or father or the parents, both the parents are going to show the young one how to do it, right? So the tiger, baby tiger, is going to learn the behavior of hunting from its parents. The hunting has to be learned during its lifetime, but the ability to hunt is already there. You cannot think of a deer learning the hunting behavior. You cannot expect a deer to learn to kill another deer in the same way like a tiger attacks, right? Because deer is not having that genetic ability to learn that particular behavior. Peacock. Of course, let us not take the example of peacock here. I think the example of deer and tiger is enough to tell you about this particular behavior. Uh, all organisms from protozoa to humans have the ability to learn at least to some extent. From the simplest organisms like protozoans to the most complex organisms like human beings, all animals have the ability to learn to some extent. Of course, the ability to learn is more in advanced group of animals like uh, the reptiles, birds, mammals, etc. But theoretically, each and every animal, which whether it is simple or most complex, it has some ability to learn. Learned behavior cannot be transferred to next generation. This is what we have to remember. You cannot expect English professor's son to be very efficient in English language, right? A doctor's son, you cannot expect him to be a doctor by birth. An engineer's son, you cannot expect him to be an engineer by birth, because whatever we learn during our lifetime, we cannot pass that learned behavior, right? So that is some basic things regarding the learned behavior. Then one concept or one type of behavior is there which is called habituation. This is a very interesting type of behavior which we observe in animals and of course in humans also. The gradual decrease in response to repeated exposure to the same stimulus if found to be harmless. That is called habituation. In simple, I can say habituation is nothing but adjusting to the background noise. The noise may be real noise or some other uh, events. Hence, it is a kind of negative learning wherein the animal learns to ignore a harmless stimulus and fails to respond. It is nothing but ignoring prolonged stimulus. I will give you an example. Say, uh, I am studying, okay, I am reading a book, and say I have moved to a new house. Initially, I will uh, I will be responsive to each and every sound that comes to my ear. Initially, I will observe the sound of the moving motors, moving vehicles. Say there is a road nearby and vehicles are continuously moving. So initially, I will be observing it and I will be hearing the sound. But when the time passes on, say for 1 day, 2 days, I will be observing the sounds. And after a few days, my brain starts ignoring those sounds because they are common, they are regular, and there is no harm. So it becomes a background noise which I learn to ignore. So like this, all the animals have this habituation. Say for example, a deer or any other animal which is feeding on the grass, and there is a sound produced by the wind, a particular sound produced by the wind, and trees making some noise due to the wind. Initially it will observe and it will show some response, so it will see that if it is dangerous or not, and after some time the animal starts ignoring that, right? So like this is called habituation. Adjusting to the background noise is called habituation, and ignoring regular noises, ignoring prolonged stimulus is the best example of habituation. So I can give you a funny example from the human beings here. Of course, don't write it in the exam. Just to make the concept of habituation more clear, I am going to give you this example. Think of you are a student, right? And your parents scold you if you don't study regularly. Now, say your father and mother scolds you every night. Every evening they start scolding you as go to study, start reading, stop watching the TV, stop using the mobile, okay, read. Initially you will respond. After some time, maybe you get irritated initially, and then you get used to it. So they will be scolding you in the background and you are not responding. So it becomes so common. Or you take the example of us, poor teachers. You know, in the classroom, we scold to the students who make some trouble, right? So you just think of yourself sitting in the classroom on the benches and talking. As your teacher, what I will do, I will scold you. As you don't make noise, stop doing this, stop doing that, like that. So initially, you will respond to me. You will respond to your teacher, right? You will get hurt when you are scolded for the first time, right? So you think you are insulted among your classmates. But if the teacher does the same thing again and again in every class, if the teacher scolds you, then you will come to know that it is harmless. That is the teacher's behavior. He is doing it regularly and nothing will happen. Then you start ignoring, right? So he will continue to scold and he will continue to ignore. The first day when he scolded you, it will uh, be very depressive for you and you are very upset in the first day. But after some times, it becomes normal for you. So this is called habituation. Even the same thing happens with us also, with the teachers, right? So you people irritate us for the first time, we get upset for the first time, then it becomes habituated, right? We come to know that the students will do this regularly and there is nothing harm in that. whatever time I spend scolding you, it is not going to change you, then I become habituated. Even though you are making noise in the background, I will go on teaching. So that is the best example of habituation, right? So getting used to the background noises like motor vehicle sounds, etc., can be considered as the best example for habituation. Now, opposite of habituation is sensitization. Even though it is not there in your syllabus, I just want to tell you, uh, same situation, but the animal may habituate or may become sensitized. I will give you the example from humans. Say your father is scolding you for not studying. What happens? You get habituated, so you start ignoring him. So every day he will scold you, and every day you will ignore. That is called habituation. It may become reverse also if you are sensitized. Say when your father scolds you for the first time, you will not respond much. Of course, you will show some response, a very little response, and the next day also he will scold you, and you are not ignoring it. You are taking it seriously. And if he continues to scold you, then you get irritated. Say after few days, you will start reacting very violently when your father starts saying, "Start studying," right? This is called sensitization. Now think, say my house is very near to a railway track. So continuously the rails are coming and going, and they're honking, right? And the train moving sound. So I have two responses. There are two possible responses. Either I must get habituated. Say first time when I hear the sound of train coming and going and trains horn, so I will observe it. But after few days, if I get habituated, I will ignore it. It is not going to affect me, right? Because I have learned to ignore that background noise since it is harmless. But the reverse may happen. Day by day, the sound may become irritating, right? So I may start showing more irritational behavior. It may start affecting me more. That is called irritation. So the same continuous harmless stimulus may elicit two types of behaviors, either habituation or irritation. I use the word sensitization. You can also call it as irritation, right? There are some behaviors which you will ignore for first time, second time. Then you get sensitized. You start revolting against that. So that is the difference, right? Uh, so you can search more information regarding this and you can find out many examples for habituation and sensitization. Now try to understand this particular behavior. I'm taking a lot of time to explain you habituation and sensitization because we human beings uh, always face this problem of habituation and sensitization. You decide consciously. Luckily, humans have the ability to consciously change our behavior patterns. So sometimes sensitization may be useful, but sensitization may be harmful also. It may start affecting our daily life. So you can think of to which you must get habituated and you to which you must get sensitized. Now, another type of behavior is imprinting behavior. Now, this is a little bit complicated concept. Imprinting is a relatively simple but specialized type of learning that takes place during critical period or sensitive period early in the life of an organism. It is a type of learned behavior, but there is a restriction here. Imprinting is a behavior which is learned at a particular time of the life. The behavior that develops during the early stage of life due to a stimulus. It is a learned behavior. You remember, it is by experience only. Now, experience comes in the terms of some stimulus. And This behavior cannot be learned at later stages of life. That is the difference between the normal learned behavior and imprinting. It is especially rapid and relatively irreversible learning process that occurs early in life. And another important thing is the imprinted behavior cannot be unlearned. It is very difficult to reverse the behavior that is learned. The central concept of imprinting is the innate release mechanism whereby organisms genetically predisposed to be especially uh, respond to certain stimuli during the critical period. I think it will be easy if you study it with an example. This is the best and famous example of imprinting. Here, the person you are looking at in the picture is the famous ethologist called Dr. Conrad Laurens. You remember the name of this person. He is the person uh, you have to remember. Dr. Conrad Laurens conducted an experiment. So before we go to the Conrad Lorenz experiment, you observe this picture of a hen and the chicks following it. I think you have seen in many movies and cartoons, etc. The newborn, which comes out of the egg, immediately after the hatching, it will start following the first moving object. And the bird will think the moving object as its parent. You know, natural conditions. In the natural conditions, what happens? Whenever the bird hatches out of an egg, it will always face its parent. And therefore, it will consider that moving object as its parent. Of course, it is a real parent. And it will start following it. And then the parent will take care of it, and it will protect it, it will teach it, etc., etc. Conrad Lorenz showed that what he did is uh, when these geese, okay, chicks or geese, ducks actually, his experiment was conducted on the ducks. At the time of hatching, he was there. Okay, so the newly born, the young ducks which came out of the egg saw the Conrad Lorenz moving, and they started following him. They started believing that Conrad Lorenz is their parent, right? So the experiment is so interesting. They started following wherever he went, right? Even they followed him in his small plane. When he flew in the air with his small plane, they followed him because they can fly, right? So this is imprinting. And identifying the parent is the imprinting behavior. It must happen at a particular time of life, in the early age of life. See, once Conrad Lorenz is identified as a parent by these young ducks, even if the real parent, the mother duck, is introduced, they will not uh, agree, or they will not accept that as their real parent. So this is called imprinting. Now, when it comes to the humans, remember there are so many behaviors which are imprinted at an early stage of life, right? It is beyond the scope of our topic, because we are studying only the definitions of animal behaviors. But I advise the students to explore some study materials where they can understand. Of course, you cannot do anything about the imprinted behavior which you already developed. You cannot go back to your childhood and change that behavior, right? So I have many imprinted behaviors which I obtained in my childhood, right? So at least the knowledge will help you uh, in some conditions, right? So that's about the imprinting. And there is one more concept which we have to study, that is called conditioned reflex. It is an acquired response in which the subject, which can be a human or other animal, learns to associate previously unrelated neutral stimulus with a different stimulus that elicits some kind of reaction. Even though the definition is very complex, but the explanation is very simple. Conditioned reflex is nothing but behavior. That means there is a stimulus and there is a response. But here, the animal starts to correlate with the stimulus, which has nothing to do with the response. That is the thing. You know, a particular stimulus will elicit a particular response. But here in conditioned reflex, what happens? There is one stimulus which will elicit a particular response, and there is no relation between the stimulus and response. I will explain it with one particular example. Uh, this is a very famous experiment conducted by Ivan Pavlov's experiment on dog. The experiment is very simple. I will explain it. This is the dog, right? And it is tied. What he did is he used to ring a bell, and then he used to provide food. So first he used to ring the bell, then put the food. Now, when the food is seen by the dog, you know, it starts eating. The sight of food will cause a reaction, I mean response. Salivation, you know, whenever we think of food, whenever we see the food, whenever we smell the food, we start salivating. So the sense, I mean the smell of food, the sight of food is the stimulus, and we respond by salivating. Because the you know, the behavior is something like this. When we see the food, we are going to eat it, so your body starts preparing to eat the food by secreting saliva, right? Your mouth is ready to receive that food. So the smell and sight act like a stimulus. Saliva production is the response. Here, what is happening? The Pavlov is ringing the bell, then he is putting the food, and the dog starts salivating. The dog salivates because of the food. Initially, the dog is salivating because the food is there, right? If he only rings the bell, the ringing of bell will not, uh, the dog is not going to respond by salivating, because there is no relation between the ringing or bell sound and the saliva, because saliva has to be produced in response to a food. Bell is not a food. So therefore, dog will not produce saliva to the sound of bell initially. But what he is doing is, first he is producing the bell sound, and immediately he is putting the food. And the dog is showing salivation and it starts eating. Now he is doing it repeatedly. Now the dog has learned a relation between the bell sound and the food. So it learns that the bell sounds, okay, if the bell is ringing now, I am going to get the food immediately. So it has started associating the bell sound with the food. So immediately after hearing the bell sound, it starts showing salivation. This is called conditioned reflex, right? You just think of ourselves, right? Whenever you are in the school, uh, uh, when the bell rings, we start running, because bell ringing indicates that end of class. It is something like that. So when the animal starts to correlate uh, with some other stimulus, that is called conditioned reflex. Ivan Pavlov's experiment beautifully demonstrated this behavior of conditioned reflex. That's about some concepts regarding the learned behavior in the animals. Thank you.